Our speaker today is a friend, Charlie Hudson. She's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. I was threatening to introduce her as a retired naval officer, but she said she'd hurt me if I did, so I decided to do it right. Charlie's an author. She's been a consultant. She's retired from the Army. She's done a lot of interesting things. Her books are very interesting. I think the one I read was her first book. Nita's read, I think, most of them. So I'll just turn it over to Charlie. Charlie?
Thank you, Bob. All right. First of all, thank everybody for coming. And can everybody hear me okay? I don't want to be blasting anybody out, but I do want you to hear me. Now, I don't have slides or anything because today is going to be an interactive kind of presentation. What does that mean? Okay, who here remembers tent revivals? Tent revivals. Give me an amen, somebody. Because that's kind of what we're going to be doing here, all right? First of all, though, I will go ahead and tell you, and I'll apologize for this part up front, the first 10 or 15 minutes are going to be a little bit sad. And the reason for that is kind of going to go from poignant to sad. And the reason for that is I want to be able to put this into context as to why I have become so passionate about this particular subject. And I can't convey that without explaining the background to it. All right? So let's start with, as Bob said, I'm retired Army, so is my husband. We came here to Homestead after our careers to pursue the fun second careers. Not that we didn't have fun in the military, but so my husband teaches scuba and I write. And so that's kind of the background of how we got here. And we chose Homestead because for who scuba dives? Who here scuba dives? Scuba dives, yes, then you know the best warm water scuba diving in the whole country is Key Largo. There's good scuba diving in other places, but this is the best. And so that was part of why we chose to come here. However, my husband, Hugh Hudson, he's actually my second husband. My first husband was also career Army. And we were married a very short period, and we had one child. And my husband was killed in an accident when our son was only 4 months old. Now, both of my husband's parents were only surviving children. So, and there were a few scattered cousins and a couple of aunts and uncles, but essentially there was no direct family left in that line. And so I remained very close to his parents, even after I remarried. And so we all had, like I said, a very close relationship. And then, as happens, my former father-in-law passed away, and my former mother-in-law was widowed and remained out in a rural area there in Maine. Well, not rural, but out from town. The classic New England, Cape Cod kind of place on 8 acres of land. You go off Route 32, if you know anything, or 132, if you know anything about the down east area, and then you hang off onto a little road, okay, and that's where she lived. And the house had been in her husband's family for 6 or 7 generations. And in fact, both branches of that family had originally come from Mass. And then they had the summer home up in Maine, which his parents had moved into during the Great Depression. And so they had moved to Maine and made it a permanent home, done additions to it and so forth and so on. And then my former in-laws moved up there when his parents began to age so that they could be there and help take care of them. And as I said, there was nobody left in the family. And so I would hear some of the family stories, and and they were always fascinating. But my former mother-in-law was a kind of a private person, and so, I would hear the stories and we would talk about things, but these things weren't captured, right? And I would occasionally see an old photo or something, but I didn't see a lot of those kinds of things. And then as she began to get older, Maine, winters, long, dark. So I thought, wouldn't this be great if she starts writing down the history of both sides of the family, And so she could keep a journal, and there would be all this wonderful, rich family history. But for whatever reason, she chose not to do that. It was just, I mean, you can only ask somebody to do something so many times. In fact, one Christmas I bought her this beautiful leather-bound journal that she could write in. Okay, that didn't work either. So, point being. And so then, as happens, she entered into a period of decline. And so this fiercely independent lady, think Katharine Hepburn, shrunk down to a size 6, okay? Sadly, she became exactly the kind of person that she had never wanted to be, losing a lot of capacity and what have you. And again, there was no direct family, so I was with her throughout that period. And in the process of many things that I learned, number one, that we truly were not as prepared as we thought we were. A dear friend of mine, who we then later lost to cancer, said that you really need to write this down. You need to capture this. And ultimately I did, and some of you have already read that, and that became my nonfiction book called Your Room at the End, Thoughts About Aging We'd Rather Avoid, okay? And it's titled that for a reason. And as I say about this book, this is the book that people least want to read, but most should, because the first part about it, it is depressing. I'm not going to say it's not, because it deals with these topics that we don't want to deal with. The second part of the book, though, is a little lighter in tone, and one of the things that it talks about is doing things like remodeling your house, you know, for if you want to stay in your home, things to do, and things like capturing family memories, all right? So after my former mother-in-law passed away, of course, then there was the estate to deal with, which I learned, by the way, and many of you already know this, even if you have a very modest estate, that doesn't mean it's not complicated. Yeah. So, and in the process of doing all of this, and again, those of you, think of it, Cape Cod home, you know, old Cape Cod home, not that big, but crammed to the rafters with stuff. And I mean, some stuff that was in good shape, other stuff, I mean, it would break your heart if you could see some of the old books and things that had crumbled and just had to be thrown away. And so here I am uncovering this amazing number of things from both sides of their family for generations back, some of which you could tell what it was, some of which now my former father-in-law's mother was the one who was meticulous with labeling photographs of who and when. She did keep a journal, you know. And so there's all of these things, many of which we didn't have a clue. We don't know who they were, who these people were, what these people were, you know. And so while we absolutely have portions of history, let me give you one example. The bedroom where my son, it was usually his room when he was up there, there were a couple of little miniature, you know, little pewter miniatures. You know, one was a picture and one was something else, which they had been there, you know, and as long as I could remember. And so as I'm going through trying to sort through stuff, the things that have to be thrown away and this, that, and the other, I run across this and I'm like, oh, you know, it's a trinket. I mean, it's cute, but, you know, plenty of trinkets. And I am ready, okay? I'm ready to take this trinket and stick it into a box that's going to be sold, you know, at the estate sale with, you know, little bits and pieces. For whatever reason, I turn it over, and taped to the bottom of this, all right, is a note that this piece was handcrafted for Ruth, which was my former father-in-law's mother, when she was 7 years old in 18 whatever it was. And then I said, you know, there's another one of these pieces. And I go and look out, and it's the same thing. And, I mean, never had this been mentioned. And it was her father that had crafted this for her, you know, among other things. And that's when, as we're going around discovering, now looking for notes about pieces of furniture and things that had in fact been affixed, you know, in places where they weren't easily visible. And so we found a number of things like that. So like I say, it isn't that we didn't recover a lot of things, but other chunks they're gone. We will never, well, not never, because I mean, in fact, my daughter-in-law took on the task, and she wound up connecting with an old, with some branch of the family, some cousin that my son had not known existed. And so I'm not going to say we never will, but there's a lot of the family history that's gone, and odds are we won't capture that. And that is why this topic means so much to me. And that is why when you leave here today, I want you to get excited about joining in this. And that is all the sad part. Okay, now we'll have fun. Okay, promise that's it. And what I want to do, I have because as someone asked, do I have to make notes? And the answer is no, because I've already made notes for you. So if you will just pass these around, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go through this as we talk about how one captures family memoirs. Back here. All right, any questions before we get started? Okay. I'll give everybody a minute. Get enough flyers passing around. We'll go to the back. And if you've got leftovers, just throw them on the table over here or come put them up here. All right. Well, we have now covered the introduction and background, and you know why this is all important. So let's talk about, first of all, if you decide. Let me start first, though. Oh, wait a minute. A little more context. How many people here have, in fact, started a project along these lines, either that you've started or you've been a part of? Great. Super. Now, let's do one more thing. When you wonder, is any of this important and would anybody care? That's a question people frequently ask. Okay, we're going to go backwards here. Let's see, looking around the room, everybody remembers Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin when they walked on the moon? Yes, everybody? Okay. Who remembers when the Korean War, conflict, police action, whatever euphemism you wish to use, broke out? How many folks remember? How many people remember World War II when it ended? How many people remembered Pearl Harbor? Still got some going. How many people lived through, at some age or the other, of the stock market crash of 1929? All right. Oh. See, we got back that far. Okay, nobody for Armistice Day after World War I, right? I mean, I don't want to. Now, those are all major events that all took place in times that have so very much changed. If you took, how many of you have children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren in about the age 12 bracket? Probably most, Pendale. If you took a rotary dial telephone and a slide rule and a manual typewriter and put them on the table and put a 12-year-old in front of that, what do you think the 12-year-old would do? That's right. It would be, what's this? And when you tried to explain, they would go, why would you do it like that? We have lived through some incredible technological advances. Think back to when you were a child, some of the things that didn't even exist. That who would have thought a wireless headphone? Who would have smartphones, computers, things that were absolute science fiction, are every day now. And this is the kind of context I'm talking about. For your children, for your grandchildren, for your great-grandchildren, so many of them just can't fathom what the world was like back when we were young. So unless you wish to leave their concept of this in the hands of Hollywood, which, okay, you can. They get it right a lot of times. By having your own family memory, your family memories captured and placed into context, then that provides them those pieces that they're not going to otherwise get, except in some history class or something that at the time they'll be bored with. Doesn't mean that they're going to be interested at this moment, but later, For all of you, how many times have you had an older relative pass away or someone, and you say, oh, I wish I had captured those stories. I don't remember that. I wish I had talked to more. And so a lot of times when you start talking about writing things down, you go, well, but is anybody going to really care? The answer is yes, in all likelihood. Does that mean that someone is going to publish your book and it's going to shoot to the New York Times bestseller list? Probably not, okay? So if that's the intent, no, don't bother, all right? But for the sake of your family and yourself, that's the reason to engage in one of these projects. And so how do you start? It can be out of the clear blue. Family reunions. Who still has family reunions? Goes to family reunions. There you go. You got anniversaries coming up. You got birthdays coming up. All of these can be events that you can tie into this, all right? And so it doesn't really matter if you key on a specific kind of event that, means something to people. You can start tomorrow. You can start this afternoon. Like I say, that part doesn't really matter. Now, let's talk a little bit about genealogy versus family history, because they're related, of course, but there is a difference, all right? And so, again, how many of you have worked with a professional genealogist or used one of the online sites or something like that, okay? And were you able to find good stuff? Great, super. It just so happens in my family, and again, part of the reason that I, for a long time, took some of this for granted was my grandmother on my mother's side, many years ago, wanted to be a part of the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. And so, of course, you have to be able to track back to that time period. And so she had gone through the process and engaged in it. Well, apparently, I was very young at the time, and number one, I wasn't that interested. Apparently, though, she lived in a very small town. And so the protocols by which one does this are very delicate. And I guess during part of the process that my grandmother, she sort of got crossways with somebody, and so there was some administrative issue. It had nothing to do with the family history that she had been able to gather and uncover, but it did have to do with not being able to actually officially join the DAR. And then on my father's side, someone, and I don't even know who it was in the family, also decided they wanted to track this back. And so they went back and did whatever and had a little book done. And so on both sides, both my mother and my father's side of the family, quite frankly, up until their parents, things are pretty well documented. And so again, for me, it's like, oh yeah, people have that. But that's what I'm saying is a lot of people don't. And that's the point here. Now, genealogy, again, that is going back as far as you can go back with as many branches as you can find, and they will begin to look somewhat serpentine by the time you get, very many generations, because people used to have a lot of children, And so, maybe your parents, maybe it was just you and one sibling, but prior to that, there may have been 3 or 4 siblings. Prior to that, there may have been 6 or 7 siblings. And then they all got married, and so you wind up with these family trees sometimes that can cover, the back wall there. And so that's part of the whole, the lineage that can be documented. And again, much of that will be found in old handwritten records and Bibles and letters and things like that. Whereas the family history, that will be the events and the substance of the relationships that are mapped out by a genealogist. I mean, nobody knows that your great-grandmother's third cousin, 3 times removed, which is mapped on the tree, that they had a big argument one time, and then, that split the family, and they never spoke to each other for the next 50 or 60 years. Okay? The genealogist will find the cousin, but they won't know the family history of those kind of relationships. So, like I said, they're related, but there's a difference there, okay? All right. let's see. Yes. Memoirs versus family history. Again, they're kind of subsets, and a lot of people will use them interchangeably. Whereas you can take a family history and you can document, and that can be a very factual kind of thing, so that everything that you or whomever writes about, it's like, okay, here's the family tree, here's how we found it, here's the deeds to the lands it did, so forth. Here's the journal that somebody kept that explains why they moved from point A to point B and this, that, and the other. Whereas a memoir, there'll be a lot of the personal things that go into that. Of the, yes, we moved because it was the Depression, but we happened to pick this area to move to because my mother's best friend when they were growing up in school had now moved there and said that would be the thing. And so and then, and we arrived there, and here's what it was like, and here's how I felt having to move from where. So that's kind of the difference in just a straight family history and a memoir. And a family history, of course, can be told by a third person, it can be told by a first person, whereas a memoir is going to be more personal, normally done by only one or two people, giving their perception as well as all of these different facts and dates and times and what have you. And so, like I say, they're very similar, but they're not quite exactly the same, okay? All right, combination, and then same thing. The online search tools now, thank heavens for the internet. Well, not always, but anyway, a lot of times. But it is amazing the things that you can find now that people never had access to before. And again, obviously, a lot of the really old stuff has not been digitized, and you won't necessarily have access to it. But what you can find are these threads, so that you go and search and you find out that in this little town that you didn't even know existed, they have a historical society, all right? And so you get hold of the person at the historical society, and this very nice individual, well, yes, we have an archive of family X. Now, you're from family Y, but it just so happens that there weren't that many families around. And so family X may have been writing about things, but it involved everybody in town. And so now you have a thread to follow because something about your family got written up by family X. And so then while you're doing that, then you find another tidbit. And so even though online research is absolutely not the be-all and end-all, it, however, can provide, like I said, a really great starting point that you can then track back. Now, professional genealogists and archivists and these folks, they're great. And I totally, absolutely, if you want a thorough job done, because there are so many sources to tap into, then that really is a great way to go. Because the other problem is with all the old records, how many of you have done this? You found those old letters, old family Bibles, and you're sitting there and you're squinting and you're rubbing your eyes and you're trying to read the scrawled script and the faded page, and the rips. It can be it's very time consuming, and it can be very tiring. And so then you sit there and you go, okay, I'm done with this, and then you may miss some really cool tidbit because you said, I'm tired of messing with this. And so if you really want to dig into and be very serious about what you're getting as complete as possible, you may want to consider finding a professional, because they're going to have the training and the access that you won't necessarily have either the time or the inclination to do. So we'll do that. All right, now, getting started. How do you start? By starting, right? It's not that difficult. You start with what you know. And as much as, and I know in this day and age of tech, saying that I actually like written journals seems archaic. But even I don't do that, I use a computer. But what I would recommend, though, is whoever does this, start using loose leaf notebooks. And the reason for that, the beautiful journals are lovely and they're great, and it's not that you can't make notes, but as this thing progresses and as it grows and as you're going to do things with it, it is really, really difficult to scan a hardbound journal. And so I would, even if the individual is writing his handwriting, then I would absolutely recommend, like I say, have a loose leaf notebook to work with. And you can have volumes, and then you can put dividers in and that kind of stuff. And speaking of writing and computers and so forth, now I have not personally done it, although I have I have an acquaintance that uses it. The speech recognition software. Has anybody here got any personal experience with it? And your experience has been?
It takes a little practice getting it to recognize your voice.
And Denise, you've used it too? Okay. Yeah, right. And so if you have someone who wants to participate, but they are not in a situation where they can handwrite things out, of course you can use a recorder, which is, in many ways, that's the best thing to do, because the individual can then just speak freely. Am I undone there? Can speak freely, and then it can be transcribed later. But they do have, like I say, the speech pattern software that can go on computers, which is a good way to do it. And so what you have to do, now you do have to decide, if you're going to launch onto this project, somebody has to be in charge. Now, that does not mean that one has to be dictatorial. I'll only take it if it's on a 3x5 card. No, but somebody does have to be, you have to say, okay guys, we're going to do this, and you have to go out to folks, and you have to tell them what you're looking for, and then somebody's going to have to put it together. It doesn't have to be one person. You can, have a small group of you that are, you'll take one side, I'll take the other side, I'll do this, I'll do that. But it's the simplest thing in the world to start, and that's just start. Because once you begin to put things down, the format doesn't matter. The sequence doesn't matter. You're going to wind up with such a huge amount of material that it's all going to have to be moved around and a piece put here and a piece put there. So if that's the least important thing. Just start. And then you can reorganize it, because things will come out that you never knew about. We'll get to that in a minute. And so, like I say, it's simple, simple, simple. You just decide today's the day, whenever that day is going to be. All right, now, okay. Note of caution here. 2 notes of caution, actually. The first note of caution. We really don't all descend from royalty, all right? Just doesn't work that way. So as you start digging back, you may discover some things about your family that aren't exactly the way they had been presented to you over the years. You may also discover that your family's relocation from one particular area may not have been under the best of circumstances, right? So you just have to be able to put things into historical context, all right, of the time that those people lived in. Because things that occurred during that time frame that today we would be, oh, I can't believe they did that. Well, because that's how things were then. So you need to be a little careful with that. And like I say, the old family skeletons in the closet, when you start doing this, those skeletons may very well tumble out. And you may very well, and I will, both sides of my family apparently had difficulty in making good political decisions about whom to support at different times in history. Now, these days, when we talk about, committing political suicide and this, that, and the other, we use it in a metaphorical manner. There was a time when there was no metaphor, okay? There was a time when you picked the wrong side, dire consequences could occur to you. And so some of the immigration on both sides of our family had a lot to do with that, right? So you pick the losing side, you better leave. And then other times. So, like I say, you're likely to discover things, and maybe not, but for the most part, you're going to probably uncover some things that aren't exactly the way that you would like for them to be. So, second note of caution. People don't remember things in the same way, right? You may have an event that occurred at some point in your life, or whoever you're talking to, that was monumentally important, and that they can, and how many of you heard this? I can remember this as clear as the day it happened. Fine, you're all excited, you capture that. And then you go around and you talk to sibling who says, what? No, that's not what happened. All right? And so you'll get that too. And then there will be other times when somebody very clearly remembers something, and you'll go to talk to other people and they'll go, beats me, And so you run into that. And when you run into that, but most likely when you run into that, then again, put it into context, okay? People remember things differently, and people perceive things differently. And so you may have an event that was important to the family, but that, isn't as clear cut as you thought it was. And so that's, like I say, so those are the two notes of caution that I would give to you when you get ready to launch on something like this. And in most cases, what you're going to do is you're going to find out things that are fascinating. There will be occasions when you will find out things that are a little disillusioning. But, that's life. And then there'll be other times when you find out things and you go, oh my goodness gracious, how cool is this? And so, but like I say, there'll be a mix in there because, we're human and we come from humans and we have those things. Okay, so now that you're finished writing, and one other thing, speaking of technology, the scanning capability these days, it is so nice because you can do things that you could not previously do. It is so much simpler. Taking the old recipes, and we've all got, who has the old recipe cards that are written in somebody's beautiful handwriting with little notes and things, and maybe it's getting a little faded and hard to read, and sure, you could transcribe it, but how much nicer, that you can scan it now, and it can go in exactly that way, and you can transcribe it too if you want to, but, and the old photographs, although you have to be careful with those, but there's so much capability now to be able to capture things and place them into written documentation that we didn't have before. And for those of you who have difficulty, just get the closest 8-year-old, and he or she will be able to fix you right up. Don't worry about it. You don't need a tech genius, all right? Okay, and so you finish writing. You've got everything all gathered together. You've got these great photographs. You've got a stack of recipes. And so what do you do with it now? And it's totally up to you. Again, there are so many wonderful options that you can do. You can do something as simple as take it down to the local printer, have it all done up, put in a spiral-bound notebook, which actually you can do that yourself. If you, if it's a relatively inexpensive machine where you can do that. And then you just put it, put a laminated cover on top, or there may very well be situations where there is something in your family that is connected with some association or a university or something like that, to where they would have an interest, or it's a region where they would have an interest in publishing it as an actual book, okay? And so you'll always want to explore that, because you'd be surprised, at how many of these associations and societies are like, well, yeah, we've been dying to have something like that. And same, particularly small colleges and universities. And then the other thing, of course, is the self-publishing kind of option that is very, very easy to do. And so you put it together, and then now, the only thing with self-publishing, which there's a couple of different ways. There's self-publishing, and then there's a print-on-demand, and I don't want to get into that because that's not germane to this particular discussion. One of the great things about doing the histories are the images and the photos and things. The more images that you have, the more that drives up the cost of publishing. And so if you have a huge number of images, then you're going to have to take that into consideration, all right? And so, which then now leads into the who writes the actual book. Again, folks, it's your family history. Yes, there is a chance that there's going to be something so fascinating in it, you know, that this is one that a big-time publisher would want to have and shoot to the top of the bestseller list. Mostly that is not going to happen. It's your family history. It's for your family. You're not going for a Pulitzer Prize here, all right? You're going to tell these stories. And as long as you can string coherent sentences together, all right, you don't need to have a professional writer, all right? Now, not knocking having professional writers do things. Obviously, I'm not going to knock that. But it's not a requirement. Not to mention, how many of you in your family have, pick one, cousin, sister, niece, nephew, daughter, son, who is a journalism major, an English major, a history major, who writes, okay? Most people do, somewhere in the family. And so you can tap into that person too. But again, capturing the memories, capturing the stories, capturing the images, this is what's important, not, you know, how fancy the writing is. And so, like I say, you have all these different options that are available to you to make it happen. And now I'm going to segue into one that talks about that. So I'm going to talk about one thing. Again, if you're going to publish something like this, there will be a cost involved. So I'm going to go back. There's actually a piece in this book that talks about this. How many people here already have as many pretty scarves, neckties, and things that you need, and you really don't need another one of those for a Christmas present, for a birthday present? All right? We all reach the stage, we need more stuff. We have enough stuff. We don't want people to give us stuff, because that's just stuff that we have to get rid of, all right? Or we have to do something with. So how about if you start a fund for writing your family history or memoirs? And instead of these presents that you really don't want anyway, and that people are like, oh, what am I going to give this year? You say, hey guys, let's contribute to the family history fund. And so you just have a little jar over there or whatever, and folks throw that in. And so that can be a way that you are sharing within the family, you know, and then you got a little money to set aside for this, and that can be your kind of gift. So it's just something to think about. So, okay, what it comes down to here, let's see, was there anything else? No, that pretty much covers all the major points. And like I say, these are all in your flyer, so you take them with you. And so, good, I'm actually just a little ahead of schedule, which I thought I might be. Questions? Questions? Anybody? Questions? Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So now I happen to have a picture, and I said, we're going to go according to this picture, so this is just how people could see your own children will see
Right.
different.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, or does anybody have an experience they want to share with having tracked down part of their history? Yes, ma'am. Part of your family history. Uh-huh. There you go. And there you have it. And that's exactly it. Like I say, you'll find things that you weren't expecting, and that can be good and bad, depending. But again, you keep things in context. Mhm. Mhm. Right. Yeah. See. Mhm. Yep. And it cuts that off.
There are, you may not be aware, but if you go on these genealogy sites, there are DNA sites where
Right. Right. You can do that. Right. And as I said, you'll find things you weren't expecting. Yes, sir.
One of the fun things to do is take that fund of money
Uh-huh.
for your history and use it to travel. Travel,
That's right.
run down your relatives.
Absolutely.
See where they're at in the cemetery.
There you go.
You're surprised to
See?
see the little babies that were born there that
Uh-huh.
nobody ever knew about. Go
Yeah.
to the local church from that.
Yep.
Look at their records and see what pops up.
Absolutely. Well, there's that. Yes, ma'am.
I have a lot of information, it kind of overwhelms me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, maybe the solution would be to put the information on ancestry.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would be there for coming generations.
Right,
I was
right.
wondering if anybody has done that, and if it's really safe, can you put personal things? Because they claim that there's no problem, but
Mm-hmm.
anybody else has done it.
All right.
I have done that, and you can protect it, but it can be private or public, your family tree. I know, but I put down public because
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
other people's family feelings get the information,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm worried about,
Well, and I think particularly if it's some of the older stuff, then it wouldn't be so much of an issue. I mean, what's going on right now today, you might want to be, a little. But if it's 3 generations ago, in all likelihood, they're not going to mind. Probably not.
One of the things you might want to do too, talking about is probably sort of segue from, the handwritten journal to give it to your 8-year-old too, and they'll get you on the internet. You may want to check into social media also, and just put out there a specific name, and you'll be surprised at what you might be able to find out, even just from searching on the name or getting the feedback to you on the name.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I have done, because I've done so much of it, is I kind of I go on the search on Google, use search column, take the most unusual names in the family. That cuts out hundreds and thousands
Okay.
of people from John and Jerry and Mary, like at Pesko.
Mm-hmm.
And I would put Augusta blah 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 and a date, and or if they had a wife, put that with it, and you would be surprised. I call it fishing.
Mm-hmm.
You will come up with a site, pages and pages, and when they're together, someone's already done it.
Right.
I've connected with so many friends with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
One of my cousins tracked down some of our family history.
Uh-huh.
She mailed me the ship's manifesto showing my grandparents coming over. They were not married at the time. They came over on different ships.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
My grandfather fought in the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
and apparently when he decided to go into service in Ohio, it was because he left a wife behind. And then he did not return to that wife. He married my grandmother.
Aha.
She did not know that until she applied for his Civil War pension to find out somebody else was applying for it.
Like I say, you'll find things that surprise you. Yes, ma'am.
I want to say that I collect all histories of people over 80 around Kentucky. And I have a little camcorder, and I do a 15-minute sequence for them to give their grandchildren.
See, what a wonderful thing. Sure. Larry. Well, Mm-hmm.
So you have Johann Hans, Johann Augustus, Johann, Johann Margaret. The distinguishing characteristic is finding generations. When you first start this, you want to decide how you want to number the generations. Some do this from numerals or grandparental generation, then letters, then additional numbers. Others do this to hyphenate for each additional generation. But it really matters if you find that you're doing this for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
put a lot of families together, if you're able to match up in different sizes of families, where you're at in time, makes it feel like this.
There you go. Yeah. And so, like I say, I hope everybody has had a good time. And I hope everybody has become inspired and that you're going to either, like I say, take this on, or when somebody in the family says, you know, I've been thinking about you, say, I'll help, all right? And I'll be here if anybody has any other questions. And Bob, do you have announcements that need to be made from, for anything?